locomotive fleet review for Blackstone. If you're new to the channel, please be sure to like and leave a comment in the description below, and don't forget to subscribe. This week we're going to be looking at the 4 coupled tender locomotives of the South Eastern and Chatham Railway, which will serve as the primary power for my proposed layout's passenger services on the South Eastern section of the Southern Railway. I'm afraid it's a rather long list this week, can't be helped. This wheelbase and locomotive type was propagated by the company throughout its lifetime and further expanded on in southern days, although those locomotives will be covered in a separate video. Today we're going to be looking at the B, B1, D, D1, E, E1, F, F1, G and L classes accumulated over an extended period from 1883 to 1920. These classes in particular were used primarily on the East Kent and South Eastern Main Line sections, including the Hastings Line, more of which anon. As always, if there are any questions you have, please leave a note in the comments below and I'll do my best to answer it. Or, better still, if you have an answer or correction, again, please leave it in the comments. Our first locomotive is the South Eastern Railway's B series, which was designed by James Stirling and originally built in 1898. Rebuilt to their B1 format between 1910 and 1927 by the inimitable Richard Maunsell. 29 Bs were ordered to fill the increasingly heavily loaded passenger services in East Kent, the first 20 being built at Neilson Reed and Company, the final 9 constructed at the native Ashford Locomotive Works. These workhorses utilised a larger boiler and modernised tender, approaching what we would now recognise as a Wainwright style, albeit taller and narrower. The springs were removed to the frames as opposed to being on the footplate of the tender and locomotive, reputedly giving better riding, and the 7-foot drivers proved stable at the high speeds demanded of them. By 1910, Wainwright had begun to experiment with rebuilding members of the class to the B1 designation, with a 10 psi increase in the boiler pressure, superheating and new sets of safety valves. Following Maunsell's succession to the role of Chief Mechanical Engineer in 1913, this rebuild programme was perpetuated, with 27 of the class eventually being rebuilt to a B1 by 1927. In terms of availability in 4mm, I believe somebody online possibly designed a 3D printed model, and there may have been a Falcon or Jidenko brass kit in days of law, but I'm not quite comfortable working with brass yet, so further investigation into kits is required. A locomotive from each class has been selected for my purposes, number 458 and 441 allocated to Tunbridge and Ashford respectively. I imagine I've probably finished both of these in Southern Olive. Next, we have perhaps the most famous of the South Eastern's 440 series, Wainwright's much appraised D class of 1901. 51 of these locomotives, commonly known as copper tops, were constructed between 1901 and 1907, 21 by Ashford, 10 by Dubbs & Co, and 10 again by Sharp Stewart, with the remaining 10 being divided between Vulcan Foundry and Stephenson's. These were intended for the heaviest of the passenger services, displacing their older siblings in these roles. I've not yet come across any numbers that suit me, any aptly allocated locomotives, but I will update my workbench thread on RMWeb as soon as I have. 21 of the Ds were rebuilt into their D1 final form between 1921 and 1927, again by Maunsell, incorporating a Belpaire firebox, superheater, and a new Maunsell-style cab, as exemplified on his N-class of 1917. The D and D1s are both available in kit form from Southeastern Finecast and Golden Arrow Productions, and the D is also now produced ready to run by Dapol, although I'm far from being able to justify an order at this time. The D's younger brother, the E, emerged in 1905 as a direct response to lessons learned from the near-perfect class. They were simplified, with maintenance in mind, less fussy in their body styling, and incorporated the Belpaire firebox from new. The wheel diameter was reduced marginally, only 2 inches, but everything else remained the same until 1908, when the final members of the class were rebuilt with extended The wheel diameter was reduced marginally, but everything else remained the same until 1908, when the final members of the class were built with extended fireboxes, perhaps with superheating already in mind. 26 were built in-house, with rebuilds to the E1 taking place between 1919 and 1920, with the same alterations taking effect as unto the D1s. The most obvious difference between the two classes by this point was the marginally shorter wheelbase of the younger generation, something which has proved a point of contention when modelling using the Golden Arrow kit. The E-class, again, is available from Southeastern Finecast, and the E1, as mentioned, from Golden Arrow. I have not yet selected a rebuilt example to run on Blackstone, but I have left a gap in my roster in the event that I choose to. In the meantime, E-class number 176 will grace Blackstone's metals eventually. We're moving back to the old Southeastern Railway now, and looking at another of Stirling's designs, the F or Males class of 1883. With 7-foot drivers, the typical domeless Stirling boiler and semi-modern tender, the class was employed on the competitive Continental Expresses, aiming to beat the Chatham's timings. These were all erected by Ashford Works between 1883 and 1898. A member of the class, number 240, was sent to the Paris exhibition of 1889 in a special livery, almost like milk chocolate, before reverting to the company's typical Brunswick green. It was exhibited along with the Southeastern's wagon lit cars, designated for its continental service. By 1903, 76 of the original 88 of the class were progressively reboilered by Wainwright, with new style cabs to boot, extending their usefulness and therefore their lifespan exponentially. All Fs were withdrawn by 1930, the remainder of the class having been previously rebuilt. Many were cascaded to secondary duties by the introduction of the D and E classes, with my chosen examples, numbers 28 and 110, being allocated to Hastings St Leonard's and Tunbridge. Again, I believe there was possibly a brass kit available in time gone by, but nowadays one can lean into the 3D design world, with one, I think, being a work in progress. Typically, the Southeastern did not tend to go in for oddities. However, in 1900, 5 locomotives were purchased from Nielsen, Reed and Company, left surplus from an order for the Great North of Scotland Railway, which had halved its order along the way. The locomotives were sold at a profit to the company and tested across the newly amalgamated Southeastern and Chatham network, appearing as far afield as Hastings, but by the mid-1900s settled into their role, typically working Medway town services and patronising the Chatham main line. They proved unpopular initially, especially with London native drivers who were used to right-hand drive, though they were accepted in time and affectionately nicknamed glasshouses on account of their capacious cabs.